I'm Jim VandeHei, CEO of Axios. I'm here today with Jonathan Swan, co-author of the new book Regime Change, which is the best book ever written on Donald J. Trump. All right, let's plunge in since we only have a half hour. Congrats, by the way.
Thanks, man.
So I was thinking about this, about Trump and how he's different. And one of the things in your book, this idea about him being kind of captivated with being a great man, not just in America, but like a great man in human history. And I think about that juxtaposed with, when you and I went in to interview him in his first term, it was still when he had this obsession with polls, right? The only thing that would be sitting on his desk is a little stack of polling data. And when we went to see him in Mar-a-Lago, it was the same thing. So he went from this small ephemeral obsession to almost scraping that to what might be the grandest possible obsession you could have. Like, walk me through that.
Yeah, Maggie and I started noticing this pretty early on last year after he returned to power. Towards the end of the election, he really pushed himself to the physical brink. Like, we have a scene in our book where one of his aides was with him. He momentarily fell asleep on his feet. I mean, for someone who's almost 80 years old, he worked so hard in that final stretch of the election. And I think, again, based on our reporting, I think when he finished that election and then had that sort of 2-month period in sort of the pleasure palace of Mar-a-Lago and everyone's coming to him and feting him, he said a couple of times, I'm done with rallies. And we haven't really seen him do any substantial domestic travel. He's sort of become quite housebound. His aides have sort of tried to get him engaged in the midterm elections, interested in issues like the housing bill. As you can tell, he's ostentatiously bored by all of these things. He won't even make a pretense otherwise. He says it out loud.
Yeah.
And so it's not completely binary. It's not that he's like, oh, I don't care at all if we lose the midterm elections, but as in terms of his mind share, it's just minuscule, and it couldn't be more of a contrast to the first term. Trump, I think, has always had innately a sort of 19th century colonialism sort of mindset about the world. I think he's always been very comfortable in a spheres of influence world. When he looks at the map of the Western Hemisphere and sees these large territories of land, Greenland, Canada, Venezuela, one advisor I was talking to said something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing, but that he doesn't really regard them as sovereign countries. He looks at Venezuela as an oil field. And he admitted to us that he basically views it as America's 51st state, or wants it to be. Essentially admitted that. He said that out loud now since then. But I think that's how he views Delcy Rodriguez now in Venezuela. He doesn't view her as the leader of a sovereign nation. It's essentially an American colony. And Greenland is territory that, in his mind, should be American. Canada, again, people thought, oh, is he trolling? Whatever. I'm not suggesting he's going to go do some military. He's not going to invade Canada. But is he serious about wanting to have Canada as part of the United States? Absolutely. And what's interesting about that vision is, in one sense, it's grand. In another sense, it's very small. Because for the last 80 years, America has led the free world and has been at the head seat of the table, built the whole architecture of the post-World War II order, led NATO. And where Trump's instincts lead him, essentially, are a regional power. He would never say that. Of course he would never say that. America's still the most powerful country on earth. But really what this comes down to is, this is our neighborhood, and Xi Jinping, you have your neighborhood. Putin, you have your neighborhood. We have a scene in the book where he's talking about Taiwan, and he holds up a little spoon, and he said, this is Taiwan. And that's how he views Taiwan. I mean, by the way, I think a lot of Americans would share that view of why would we fight a war over this tiny island nation right near China. I think if Trump could guarantee a supply of semiconductors, he'd be very open to having a conversation about Taiwan. It's not me thinking that. He's made that pretty clear. He's certainly intimated that, and people around him believe that. So I think that's how he views the world. And the difference in the second term is he's basically living out in his presidency what he wanted to do or would have done in the first term if he didn't feel under siege with investigations, or if he hadn't surrounded himself with advisors who thought that his worldview was detestable and dangerous.
The scene where he hands you this sheet of paper comparing himself to like some of the great leaders of all time, some of the most horrendous leaders of all time, Hitler being on that list. How sincere is that?
Well, I should contextualize it. The document which he handed us, which he said was written by a historian, it wasn't, but we can talk about that later. But the actual document, the premise of the document was essentially the thesis of our book. It was written in a very over-the-top, florid way, but the thesis was the same as our thesis, which is Donald Trump is the most powerful. The lead sentence was Donald Trump is the most powerful man who's ever lived on the face of the planet. We don't say that in our book. What we do say is he's the most powerful American president in our lifetime because he's willing to use the full power of the U.S. government in all sorts of ways that other presidents haven't been willing to use. That was the thesis of this document. It then went on to compare him to all of these, frankly, monsters of history. Many cases monsters. Some cases there were different degrees of monstrosity, but Genghis Khan, Attila the Hun, whatever. The premise of the document was those warlords and conquerors couldn't project power like the US can project power, and that Donald Trump has global reach in charge of the US military, the world's most powerful economy, technology, what have you. He was making a point about power. He wasn't making a point about morality or values. In fact, that didn't even come into the equation. It was completely absent. But what was interesting, he wasn't trolling at all. Because I know that because he's shown this document to other people who he respects and asked their opinion about it and whatever. I think he was completely sincere about it. But he seemed to be relishing that kind of historical company. Napoleon, he sort of sat back and read the name out. You put that together with the huge risks he's taking globally, which you and I know he wouldn't have, even in identical circumstances.
Right. For sure.
I can't find an advisor who thinks he would have taken these risks in term one. Firstly, he didn't, but even under identical circumstances with, the situation in Iran, global trade war, whatever, he didn't do it. So why is he doing that? And why is he putting his physical imprint all over Washington, monuments, namings? I think Donald Trump wants to be the singular historical figure of our time, the one that we talk about in 100 years, 200 years' time. And I think that's how he's governing in this second term. And when that's your lodestar, considerations about short-term domestic politics just melt away, and they become just almost irrelevancies.
Thank you so much for watching Behind the Curtain. We're going to take a quick break to hear from our underwriting sponsor, Accenture.
I'm very excited about our reinvention story today, which is literally 160 years in the making.
The reinvention was trying to bring a company into the trends of the future.
He operates with such a short attention span, such an ephemeral nature to his thinking and to his operations. Like, how do those sit together? Like to really put yourself in the pantheons of the great ones, of the people that people talk about in any kind of positive light 100 to 2 years from now, it requires like a level of discipline, a level of kind of systematic having like a method. Like work with me on that.
Well, I think that's where he's coming unstuck. Donald Trump's problem has always been he's very good at the announcement. He's very good at the big showy shock and awe display, and has very little patience for follow through and for the disciplined process of execution. So, perfect example, last year, he empowered Steve Witkoff, his special envoy, to negotiate with Iran. He started out with this very florid letter that he sent to the Ayatollah, which, people we spoke to said essentially amounted to, love to do a deal, be a real shame if we had to blow up your country. I mean, I'm being a little glib and paraphrasing, but it wasn't that far off from that. he didn't have the discipline or the attention span to follow through on those negotiations. He only really let them play out for a few months and then ultimately decide to go in with Netanyahu on a bombing campaign. You take this Iran operation, which I believe Donald Trump, I'm not saying this is the only reason he did it, but I do think from talking to aides that it was very appealing to him that this had been a problem that had existed for 47 years and no American president could solve it. The revolutionary regime had defied every president, and that I, Donald Trump, could be the president to solve this problem. I think he believed, based on every bit of reporting we have, that this was going to be a very short war, that this would be rapid, that the regime was a paper tiger and they would collapse. And of course, that was a complete miscalculation, didn't happen, and he's living with those consequences now. So I think what you're just describing is you can have those ambitions and motivations, but if you don't actually have the discipline and the long-term strategic thinking and the execution, you come into trouble. It worked out well for him in Venezuela. When we sat down with him, Trump described that as a 1-hour war. And of course, that's hyperbole, but, not far off.
Yep.
Pretty spectacular military success and got in a more pliant leader. And I think he thought a version of that was going to happen in Iran.
Does he have any self-awareness of how unpopular he is, how bad the polls are, how much Republicans privately in Washington disdain him, how much he's lampooned by people? Or is he in such a bubble or in his own head that he doesn't really see it?
It's hard to be black and white about these things. I think, as usual, it's a bit murkier and more nuanced. It's also hard to know because it's not something he would articulate. He's not someone who really vocalizes vulnerability, which is what this would be, to say, oh, I'm so hated. He doesn't lament that. And he's someone who also, as we've written about a lot, you've written about, I've written about, subscribes very sincerely to the power of positive thinking and is always just expressing reality. Even if it's completely divorced from reality, he will sort of try to manifest this positivity. So I don't think it's something that he engages with in a deep way. He also sees much less polling this term, is something we've reported. His staff is not constantly coming to him saying, look at this poll, look at that poll. That's just not the dynamic at all. He's not soliciting it so much. And he certainly does have a tighter information ecosystem than he did in the first term. In the first term, there'd be more random coming across of information, like scrolling Twitter. That's not so much the case anymore. There's a sort of pretty tight world that he inhabits at Mar-a-Lago, largely flatterers coming up telling him, he's the greatest ever. And every president lives in a bubble. It's not unusual. Biden lived in a very small bubble, especially at the end. But Trump really doesn't hear a whole lot of criticism, skepticism, pushback. That's not the world he lives in.
And based on your reporting, and you've been a student of the president for a long time, you've kind of watched the different rhythms, the different teams around him. I think people hear the story about the historian and him getting worked up about wanting to be as big as Napoleon or Hitler. They see his vast expansion of the power of the presidency, and then they worry, right? They worry, oh my God, what's going to happen in these final couple of years, particularly if he's under fire from Democrats, particularly if he's unpopular with the public. Did you come away from your reporting like more worried?
I don't know. I don't know that. Let me put it this way. I think any American watching what's happened to the U.S. presidency, not just in this administration, but over successive administrations in terms of the consolidation of power and, frankly, the weakening of Congress. Congress almost left the field entirely last year. That's not how the system is set up. And what Donald Trump demonstrated last year, one reason that we were so we felt so urgently that we needed to write a book about last year is what Trump showed last year is that a lot of the restraints that we take for granted around the US presidency are norms. They're not laws. And when you have a president who's just willing to do the thing and see if the system can catch up to him and act with great speed and force on multiple fronts, the system's not really built for that. So what happens is the system plays catch up. And by the time they've sort of got their shoes on and their pants on, a lot of things have changed on the ground, whether it's, from the fairly trivial, a big hole in the ground where the East Wing used to be, or whether it's a global trade war that the Supreme Court months later says is, based on invalid authorities. Trump is just doing the thing, or whether it's empowering the richest man in the world to basically be a co-president for a few months and to unilaterally shut down USAID, which everyone seems to have forgotten about because it feels like a lifetime ago, but that's a agency set up by Congress that was just whoa. I think any president who has shown that willingness to just act and use that power is something that is worth taking very seriously. There's nothing we found in our reporting that led us to speculate about any, one kind of hesitation I had with that list of people that he put forward is, I hate the Hitler comparisons. I think they're just totally invalid. I'm Jewish. Donald Trump's not wanting to gas all these people. And so even the mention of that name just creates all sorts of imagery. The point of that story of Trump handing us this list of names was that values and morals really didn't play into it. It was just an expression of raw power. So the question then becomes, well, what does Donald Trump want to do with that power? And I think it's a bit of an open question. One of the things we can see pretty clearly is their intent on regime change in Cuba. That's something that I think, they're going to try to affect. I don't know how or exactly the mechanism for that. But beyond that, he hasn't really laid out a vision for the last 2.5 years of this presidency. So it's a little bit of a black hole. We don't really know where this is going to lead.
Based on the reporting, are there things that he kind of fantasizes about that we should be watching for that would be kind of like the next leap in terms of doing the unthinkable with the power of the presidency?
Well, when you say the unthinkable, like, what do you mean by that?
I mean, there's just as small as like doing the regime change or trying to do regime change in Iran when people really didn't see it coming, or doing what you're talking about with usurping the power of the Congress early on. Like the things that come to my head are like, I think you and I've talked about this. It's not inconceivable that he really does try to divvy up the world with China in some kind of deal where like we surrender Taiwan in exchange for something else, or his territorial ambitions become more real. Every time I think that that's possible, he kind of does something that offsets it, right? Like even with the Fed, like putting Kevin Warsh in, like he's kind of a normal guy, right?
Totally.
Trump always kind of pulls himself back. He kind of cares what people think of him. He can be persuaded at the last second if someone calls him late at night. Wants to have like smart, good-looking people in certain positions. And so I just like that there's like an incongruency to that.
Yeah, and like most things in life and reporting, it's just not so black and white. It's more nuanced. And I think the Federal Reserve's a great example. As we document, like we go deep in the book inside his efforts to bully Jerome Powell into lowering interest rates and really to make his life miserable. I mean, it's kind of extraordinary, all the things that I don't have time to get into it here, but all the things he tried to do behind the scenes. But so everyone then made the leap of saying, okay, well, because he wants a supplicant there and wants to be able to control interest rates, he's going to put, the ultimate lackey in there. And in the view of some people around Trump, I'm not endorsing this view, I'm just saying this is the view about some people around Trump, Kevin Hassett would have been that person who would have just done whatever Trump wanted. Trump was ultimately persuaded that Kevin Warsh, who is a highly regarded figure on Wall Street, highly regarded, even maybe they don't admit it publicly, but I know some pretty prominent Democrats who think very highly of him,
For sure.
With a real track record, who would be at the top of the list of, any Republican president's picks for the Fed. I think what happened was Trump was persuaded that a Federal Reserve chairman is not a king and they can't just dictate. They have to get a board of governors behind this, and they actually have to have constituencies and respect and whatever. So he actually made what was a more nuanced decision than other people thought. So again, it's just not black and white. And that's why I don't make these like sweeping declarations about what Donald Trump might or might not do. I think the point is his North Star for all of these things, whether they're like, putting his name on a building or building, the Arc de Trump, or whether it's regime change in another country, is how can I do things so that I will be remembered forever, that I will be this great figure of this time that is changing the world, doing quote unquote big things. That's his North Star. It doesn't mean that he doesn't get distracted or off course, or that he'll occasionally make decisions that you can't quite neatly fit into that box. And I think one thing that we try and do in the book, and is one of the benefits of covering him for so long, is we try to provide that nuanced, textured view of him and his world. Again, people can't be fit neatly. People often depict this world as like this faction versus this faction. It's kind of bullshit. Like, that's not really how his world works. It's just much messier. And by the way, much more secretive. The other thing we found in this reporting, and it's been a hugely difficult task, is it's just much harder to get real information that they actually want to keep quiet. These guys are very good at keeping secrets, unlike the first term. And a perfect example recently was the Memorandum of Understanding for the peace deal with Iran. The number of people inside the US government that had seen the actual text of that document was microscopic. So that, we're living in a country that's being run by essentially 6 people and Donald Trump. And it's a very closed ecosystem. So one of the goals of the book was to try to take people inside that, help explain how it works, and show them, how their country's being run.
I think you and I have a shared obsession and belief that this sort of expansion of the presidency has real consequences for the country. It's not a Trump phenomenon. It's been going on for 25, 30 years. He's certainly taken it to new lengths. The thing that is different, and the thing you and I have talked about this, like that is different, is the amount of grifting underneath him. And almost like without consequence, just the amount of money that the Trump kids are making, that the Wyckoff kids are making, just all over the place in so many different baskets. What do you make of that?
Well, Trump said, it was to our colleagues at the Times, if I recall correctly, but he said something to the effect of, in my first term, we didn't do any new international deals, and no one gave me credit for it. It's like,
right.
Credit, it's the basic requirement,
Yes.
that just about every president, adheres to. So then he said, well, I realize no one cares. So open season. And that's what this has been. I mean, I know people, sort of senior people around Trump, who are surprised by the scale of it. Because what's different is scale, right? It's not the first presidential family that's made money, different family members. Of course it's not. But this is orders of magnitude larger. I mean, when you take the Emirati $2 billion investment in the Trump stablecoin, and a secret 49% stake, when you look at all the deals being made around the world, it's just head-spinning amounts of money. And it's made the Trump family richer than they've ever been. I think what you're watching is immunity, essentially. And what I mean by that is 2 things. One, the Supreme Court conferred sweeping immunity on all presidents with their decision in 2024. And Trump privately has said at different times, I'm immune, sort of like relish. So there's that decision. It's very hard to imagine an act that he could take as president that could end in any type of prosecution. But secondly, we also have reporting in the book that he's said privately on a number of occasions that he'll pardon anyone who comes within 250 feet of the Oval Office. Different times he says 20 feet, sometimes 25 feet, sometimes he says 200 feet. But when you're operating in an environment where your former personal attorney runs the Justice Department, which, again, unheard of in this era, post-Watergate era, when you are going to pardon everyone around you, you've said that privately, And when you have sweeping immunity, what's the limiting factor? Congress, impeachment. I think Trump assumes if the Dems take the House, he will be impeached again. He just certainly doesn't want to be impeached again, but everyone around him assumes that will happen. But of course, there's no universe in which he gets convicted. So the Senate math would never add up to that. So what's the accountability mechanism? There isn't one. It's shame. It's just being shamed. And of course, the notion that Trump would be shamed out of something seems pretty far-fetched.
Did you walk away from your reporting feeling like it's kind of a given that JD Vance will be his successor?
I don't think anything in politics is a given, obviously, you know that, but I certainly think he's in the best position of anyone to be his successor. And I think too much is being made of the sort of, yes, Trump is messing with Rubio, Vance. He does the whole thing. I mean, we have a crazy scene in the book where he has Rupert Murdoch at the table. You guys reported this, where he literally gets Rupert Murdoch to assess each of them. So I don't think Trump's going to make it easy for Vance, but Marco Rubio has privately and publicly said that he's not going to challenge Vance. Of course, politicians can change their mind, but I see no indication that he's preparing for a run. And most people there at a senior level believe the only way he would is if Donald Trump forcefully intervened and said, Marco, you're my guy. I really want you to do this. In that circumstance, I'm not sure JD Vance would run. I mean, that would be kind of almost probably a suicide mission. Why would he do that? So yeah, I do think he's in the best position. And I think there's a world in which Trump says, can you both be on the ticket together? But who knows? We'll see how it plays out.
Well, congrats on a great book. Always a treat to talk to you, and keep on selling. How many have you sold so far?
A lot.
A lot. There you go, buddy. It's a whole game.
A lot, man.
Well, you deserve it. You guys are great reporters, and
Thanks, dude.
Don't forget, you need to quit the New York Times and come back to Axios soon. So get on that.
All right, man. Thanks.
I'll take that as a yes.